the finances of the country were. And they thought that that would give them a holiday to do certain things, and they misstepped. When the economy started to go bad, and one of the first issues that came up, and we discussed this in the party, was when Kerzner decided that they were going to let go 1,100 people, over 1,000 people. We argued on our side that that would be detrimental, and it would be a dramatic mistake to do that. And we questioned whether the government had sat down with Kerzner and find out if there was a way for the government, either through increased concessions or direct input, to help and save those jobs at Cushing, because at that point we saw what was coming.
Well, the government did sit down with Kerzner.
The government did?
Yes. Kerzner sat down with the government and other
was this before they,
leaders in the private sector.
No, but get straight. The Kerzner sat down with government after they had made the decision to do what they did. Sat down with the opposition too. Well, they sat down with us and they explained what they were about to do.
Yeah, but what did you tell Mr. Kerzner?
Well,
what did the opposition tell Mr. Kerzner about
the opposition asked certain questions of Mr. Kerzner whether or not government had proposed certain things, and which they said no to. The point is that when you see that your country is going into what we consider recession or difficult times, you have to make certain provisions within the economy to shore that up. One of the advantages we had was that, unlike the rest of the world, our financial institutions were not in jeopardy. Our financial banking institutions were solid and they were sound. And so to a great extent, we had an opportunity in this country to ride through this recession and invest our money in such a way that when we came out of the recession, our people would be better trained, our economy would be diversified in such a way to take advantage of whatever the opportunities were that would create it coming out of the recession. But no, our government sat back and said they were waiting for the U.S. economy to turn around, and they continued to borrow money to put it into areas that made no long-term sense as far as our development was concerned, and they were unapologetic about it.
Mr. Alkides, yes?
I'll tell you how things would be different under a Progressive Liberal Party administration. If we accept, and it's generally accepted, that in times of recession, governments who run deficit, they would borrow money and spend the money in the economy to try and create some jobs and stimulate some economic growth. But, for example, if we look at the road project, the government borrows $120 million, and instead of spending it with Bahamian companies and creating employment and business opportunities for Bahamians, they spend it with a foreign company. Less jobs created for Bahamians.
I don't want to interrupt you, Mr. Alkides, but the government responds to that particular point by saying that the majority of people who are working on the road project, they are Bahamians. The laborers are Bahamians. And so the wages they are earning stay in the Bahamas.
Understood, but I'm talking about the laborers and also having the opportunity for Bahamians who own heavy equipment or Bahamians who are in business to get a big piece of the pie. I made the suggestion in the Senate that if we're saying we're in a recession, why don't we scale down the road project? Instead of spending $120 million on the road project, scale it down to $80 million and take $20 million of those dollars and create a proper public transportation system. Again, where you're creating employment and wealth opportunities for Bahamians.
But wasn't that money borrowed from the IDB for the specific purpose of improving our roads?
It was.
So how can you then take money that the IDB gave you or loaned you for the improvement of roads and put it somewhere else?
You go to them and you say, look, gentlemen, we are experiencing the worst recession since the Great Depression. We understand what your policies are in terms of bidding. If we're borrowing the money from you, we have to open the bidding. But these are extraordinary times. What we need to do is we need to scale this back, and if you would lend us some more, we want to invest some money in improving our public transportation system. And so my whole point is, yes, we understand you have to borrow money, but we believe it would be more effective if you were to spend that money where Bahamians can not only have job opportunities, but they can have opportunities to expand their businesses.
Not only that, I'd like to add to what Senator Alkides had said. The government has indicated that, yes, most of the jobs are most of the jobs are done by laborers here in the Bahamas. But we don't have qualified companies who can build roads in the Bahamas. That's really the question. Instead of half of the money staying here and half of the money leaving the country, why can't all of the money stay in the country? That's really the point.
Gentlemen, let's move to another point. And the point is that the recession really began in 2008, about a year or so after the P.L.P. lost power. There is a criticism by some Bahamians that even in the 5 years that the P.L.P. ran the country, you did not put policies and programs in place to diversify the Bahamian economy so that we were not as dependent on tourism as we are now. Speak to that issue. The extent to which even your government between 2002 and 2007 did not diversify the Bahamian economy.
I think to a certain extent, Mr. Jones, that is acceptable criticism in some ways, but you have to realize too what the situation was in the country.
That's not that criticism.
Yeah,
so it
course,
is true.
Well, to some extent, I think successive governments have not really focused sufficiently on diversifying our economy. To a certain degree, our model today is somewhat similar to what it was back in the 50s and 60s, and so to some extent that has to be accepted. But the point is that in 2001, you have to recall also that when the P.L.P. came into government, that at that point we were going through somewhat of a recession after 9/11 as well, and the country's finances were not in a good state. Tourism was down. Tourists weren't traveling. We experienced less than 1% of economic growth, and we had challenges then to deal with, not to mention the various hurricanes and so forth that happened. But even in spite of all of that, the Christie administration was able to grow revenue from $850 million to almost $3 billion, a 50% increase in revenue over a 5-year period. Unprecedented in the history of the Bahamas, the amount of economic growth we had, and doing all of that and not raising one single tax. You see, when you look at the road project and you look at the way the Christie administration handled it after they came into power, and the company had gone bankrupt who were doing the road project, we went to the IDB and other people and said, listen, we are not going to give it out to the same company that has it now, because they went and messed up the roads in Jamaica, but we prefer to divide it up amongst our contractors here locally, keep the money at home, and we would divide it in segments. And they accepted that. At the end of the day, we are the ones borrowing money. I hear people talking about the IDB did this and the IDB say that. Well, we don't have to borrow from the IDB. If they don't want to lend us on terms that we want in order to develop our country, why do we have to borrow from them? At the end of the day, we the ones paying. We should be the kings and master over the money we borrowed and how we structure the financing. And so when you just look at that in and of itself, as one example, the Minister of Works, Mr. Bradley Roberts, decided that we would divide the contracts up, and Bahamians build excellent roads. Okay. Excellent. And so how can a government today come and say that Bahamians cannot do the work? I heard someone in government tell me 2 weeks ago Bahamians cannot do the work. And I was astonished. Yeah. In spite of what the evidence is, clearly that Bahamians have built excellent roads here.
Okay. Senator Davil, yes. Standard & Poor's said that the economy of the Bahamas is too narrow. And an official of the Caribbean Development Bank said to us on the weekend that our over-reliance on tourism is dangerous. Tell me, how would or should a progressive Liberal Party government or any government expand the economy of the Bahamas so that we do not find ourselves in the future in this debacle?
Well, firstly, tourism is our #1 industry, followed by financial services. It's important for us to continue to focus on developing our tourism product. But at the same time, we must be able to diversify our economy and follow suit like other countries in the region. You take, for example, countries like Trinidad and Jamaica. For years, they have been developing their light manufacturing base and their agricultural products for more than one reason. We have gone into relationships with many bodies like the European Union, and